Welcome to the Josh Huisman Podcast.
All right, everybody, welcome to the podcast, episode 49. And this is, I'll tell you what, this goes back to why I started doing this podcast in the first place. I wanted to talk to pastors. I wanted to talk to ministry leaders. And my dream was to be able to talk to people who were massively influential in my life and just have a chance to sit down with them, have a conversation, first off, and say thank you, and then second, to hear backstories and the fun stuff of what they're involved in. And today I have Andy Chrisman, and he has a long resume of wonderful things that he has done. I knew him best in his role in the group For Him, in the Christian music group. I also know him from being a worship leader at Church on the Move, and I want to talk about all of that fun stuff. But first off, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Josh. Thank you. This is it's so nice. I love your podcast studio.
Thank you.
And you very graciously allowed me to come in here and get some interviews for my podcast. While I'm in town. So.
And they have been awesome to listen to. And
man, they've been some good ones, huh?
When they come out, good stuff.
Yeah,
for sure. So your audience is going to be thrilled. Thrilled because it's some amazing stories.
Yeah,
and I'm not stealing any of their thunder. But it's good.
Oh yeah, they're going to be good.
Yeah,
for sure.
So let's go here, okay? Because I have so many funny personal stories I can tell you.
Okay.
That involve you, and that you are not
that
involved,
I'm aware of.
That you're not aware.
Oh,
of.
okay.
Okay. But we're going to go down.
I'm a little scared.
But first off, let me just say this, because you have a weekly podcast. That you sit down with Christian music artists, influencers, writers, all of that. Like, where did that come from?
Yeah, so it's called 1 Degree of Andy, and basically the idea of it, and I'm sure it'll change depending on how long this goes. And I've got a massive list of Christian artists that I haven't got to yet. But the gist of the whole thing is that I sit down with Christian music artists from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, which I call the golden era of Christian music. It's like it's the CCM that we don't really hear anymore. And I just have a passion for telling these stories. I call it 1 Degree of Andy because of my involvement in For Him and Truth even before that, and just a lot of the concerts I went to as a teenager in the late 70s, early 80s. I got to meet just about everyone that was a player in the Christian music scene from that era. Mm-hmm. So I have some sort of connection or some sort of story with just about everybody in the industry. And so, yeah, we're more than 50 episodes in, and it's just been really, really fun. So I started a radio show. Well, I got the opportunity to do a radio show. I didn't start it. When I moved to Tulsa in 2005, I became the worship pastor at Church on the Move, which at the time was the largest church in Tulsa, and there was a radio station there that had just started, a Christian radio station, and they came to me and said, well, you're the worship pastor of the largest congregation in Tulsa. What if you did a Sunday morning radio show for us and played worship music? And they just figured we start out with 10,000 people that'll listen to it because of
Church on the Move.
Because of Church on the Move.
Right.
And they weren't wrong. And I was like, well, I've never been a radio show host before. Mm-hmm. I've done a lot of interviews as a part of For Him, but I've never been the one
to carry it on your own.
Right.
Yes.
So I'm like, well, let's try it. And so they put a producer with me and helped me navigate what that would be like, what catchphrases to stay away from and all that kind of stuff. And so it blew up. It was the largest, still is the most listened to radio show in the Tulsa area.
So it's still going?
On Sundays, yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's still going.
Very cool.
We're 19 years into it, 19 years into it. And now we're syndicated on 500 plus stations around the world. And we have projected 5 million listeners every weekend. And it's just really, but anyway, I kind of developed a skill set on doing interviews and being on the radio. And I've always had a little pet project in the back of my head of going back and maybe doing a radio show and called, well, I had an idea for a show called Hit Rewind. And we even had the graphics for it and everything. And, just maybe a companion show that would play some of those golden era songs from when I was in For Him.
I love it.
But I didn't have the bandwidth back then to do it. But then the Jesus Music movie came out, a year or so ago, a couple years ago. And it kind of triggered something in me again to go, there's a lot more stories to be told than were just told in that movie. And it's just a 2-hour movie, right? So they couldn't get to everybody. And I'm like, there's a lot of people whose stories need to be told. And I know those stories. I know a lot of them. So I was like, let's just try it. And I had some people in my sphere of influence that were like, we can help you set up a podcast. It's not that hard. And so I just went for it. And I just started calling my friends. I called, Greg and Jana Long of Avalon. And they were, we had a little fly going on.
A little fly in here. I don't know what,
I'd gone down to lead worship at their church in Dallas. And they had a nice little podcast studio. And I was like, hey, while we're here, I'm thinking about doing a podcast. Let's get an interview. So they were the first ones. And it was great. Did a little 30-minute interview with them. And then I called Clay Cross, who lived just up the road from me in Arkansas. He was at a church up there. And so I went up there and hung out with him. And then I went down to Houston and sat down with Wayne Watson, who I've been friends with for a long time. And that was a great interview. And then I just started making the phone calls. Mm-hmm. And before I knew it, I had, 10, 15 episodes in the can. And I was like, this actually it's interesting.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
And then it just took off from there. So, I love telling the stories because behind all these songs you remember, behind all these artists that we really loved, there's a human element. There's how they got into business, what it was like when they were at the height of their career, and what happened at the end, because there's an end to all of these careers.
There is. And I'm glad you do it, because what I have found interesting with a couple of the artists who I've sat down with, who I listened to in my younger days and who I admire so much, their first question to me was like, does anyone even care?
Yeah.
Does anyone want to hear that? And I go,
I care.
Yeah.
Let's start with me.
It kind of took me back. Wait, what do you mean, does anybody care? There's a whole world out there who wants to hear the story and the backstories, even behind the songs and the different things.
But what's wild about the Christian music industry is there's no recurrent format. Mm-hmm. In rock music, you've got classic rock stations, and you got 90s stations and 80s stations and classic country and classic jazz. And, there's all this stuff where there's formats, and there's a system built around delivering music from these different eras. With Christian music, there's not.
If I were Elon Musk, that's what I would do. I would buy my own radio
let's call
station.
him. Let's do it.
Let's call him and let's do that. So let's talk about For Him a little bit. Since I have you here, and this is my chance, because if I don't go into this right away, we're going to be here for 3 hours, and you don't have that much time. So when you said you were in Truth, and then For Him started in 90-91, is that the
1990,
timeline?
yeah.
1990?
Basically, yeah.
And was that something, because you guys were in Truth together, and then so it kind of formed out of that?
Right. So I got hired to be in Truth in 1987, and when I got there, Mark Harris was already there. He joined the group in 86, and then about 2 months, so February of 87 was when I got in, and then right around the beginning of the summer of 87, Marty McGehee joined the group. And so if you don't know what Truth was, for your listeners who don't know what Truth was affectionately by us that were in it, we called it Christian Music Boot Camp, because it was 24 people on a bus. We did 300 plus shows a year. So you didn't have a home to go home to. Your home was the bus or whatever hotel we stayed in or host home we stayed in that night. That was it. You owned a suitcase, a briefcase, and a garment bag. That was it. And you got paid peanuts because all your expenses were taken care of on the road. Mm-hmm. But it was, Steve Green came out of Truth, For Him came out of Truth, Avalon came out of Truth, Natalie Grant, some of the Point of Grace girls, Little Big Town, Karen Fairchild, that's part of Little Big Town, came out of Truth. There are all these musicians that are now playing for country artists, and some of the leaders in the industry all had their start in Truth. So it was a great place to go and learn how to become a professional musician, but it was also a grind, because the four of us. So then Kirk joined the group in later that summer in 87. So the four of us were in Truth together and did 1,000 shows as the 4 guys in Truth. And there were 4 girls that also sang, so there were 8 of us on stage, 4 instrumental, 4 horns, lighting, sound, all production, all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, we were road dogs.
So
did 1,000 shows together before we ever did a shows for him.
And so Mark Harris became one of the primary songwriters for him, right?
He did.
Right on that?
Yeah, so he was writing a little bit in Truth.
Okay.
I don't think he ever got a cut on one of the major releases, but I think he wrote a song on the Christmas record that we did in like 1988, 89. And he may have co-written a song or two on one of the later Truth albums that we were part of, but he didn't really start writing anything that was a major release until that first For Him record.
So what did that look like? Who was the first guy who went, "Hey guys, I got a little side gig. Who wants to sing with me?" Or did you know, hey, we sound kind of good together, us little group of 4?
So like I said, Truth was a transient group. So doing that many shows a year, you're not going to make a long-term living doing that. You just can't do it. And so people were always rotating in and out of the group. So, Mark replaced somebody, and then 3 months later, I replaced somebody, and then Marty replaced somebody. And there were always different people coming in and out, would stay a year or two. But when the 3 of us got together, there was just something about the way our voices fit. We all had individual styles that were different from each other, but when we sang in harmony, it was unique. It was very Restless Heart or Eagles. We all had those same types of experiences listening to that music and growing up on that music. And so when we sang it made people notice us. It captured people's attention. And so Roger Breland, who ran the group, he was smart enough to build on that and to create moments in the concerts for that. So with, if you can imagine 300 plus concerts a year, you're everywhere. You're everywhere twice, right? And so you would have the same people coming over and over to the shows. And so there was a little bit of a following. We got to be known as the 4 Truth guys.
Yeah.
And Truth was on the Benson label at the time. And so the Benson people would come to the shows, or we'd do a show in Nashville, and people would start to go. And you've got A&R guys that are always looking for someone new to sign. And so Roger would feature us and do a little Southern gospel number or, something that was just the 4 of us, and people started to notice. So, and like I said, after maybe 2 to 3 years of being together, we're all going, we can't continue. Like, Marty tried out for the Gaither Vocal Band and almost made it. And had he gone, he wouldn't have been in For Him, and so we'd have to that wouldn't have happened. So
there's a bunch of those Gaither Vocal Band stories that float around.
Oh, yeah.
Because when Michael Tate was in here, he said the same thing for DC Talk. He tried out for Gaither Vocal, thought he was going to make it.
Yeah.
And then that would have been no DC Talk.
No DC Talk, or at least it wouldn't have looked like what it looked like. Yeah.
Right.
So we knew, we'd been in it long enough to know we're going to split up at some point and all go our separate ways. And the story is, we all have a little different version of the story, that we were in Mobile, Alabama, and singing for a walkathon. And we'd sat down at a McDonald's somewhere, and Mark and Marty and I started talking about, hey, what if we started our own thing? What if we became a group and did our own music? And Marty talked about how he used to be with his college buddies, and they would sing 3 or 4 part harmony in the stairwell, and Mark would just talk about the bands he grew up listening to, and I would just I was the younger guy. I was 4 years younger than those guys, and so I just kind of leaned in, like, if you need a 4th, or if you need another guy, I'll be a part of that. That's interesting to me, because I didn't have any plans past 4. I didn't know what I was going to do past Truth. And then Kirk was in the booth behind us, and he leaned over and says, hey, don't have this conversation without me. And so he came around, and that is where the conversation started. Well, Roger was already talking about us to the label, because he knew he was going to lose us because of just the rigors of the schedule. And so he was already starting to broker a deal, kind of in the shadows.
On your behalf?
On our behalf. And so all that kind of started coming together. And there wasn't New Song was just kind of starting out. The Imperials weren't what they were back in the 80s. So there was a little bit of a hole there in Christian music for a male vocal group. And, they were at Benson, they saw the vision of it and offered us a deal. Mm-hmm. And so we started really seriously talking about it in the fall of 1989 was when we started really listening to songs and talking producers, and the ball really started rolling on what this could be.
So if you rewind back to that time, I think was your first major hit Where There Is Faith?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what did that feel like? I mean, so everything you just said, coming out of that, where you're kind of in the grind and you're doing all this and you're a part of this major 24 people on a tour bus type thing, and now you're a part of your own group. You're 23 years old, you said?
23. I was, I guess I was the youngest. The other guys are a little bit older than me.
Okay. Maybe another question would be, what's it like to know at 23 years old you're singing about faith? I mean...
Well, no, you don't. You don't know what it means.
I know I didn't.
Coming out of a Christian home, and parents never got divorced, and both, I had a pretty good life. Mm-hmm. You sing about faith because it's what you're supposed to sing about, and you sing the hymns out of the hymn book about pain and suffering and the great beyond, and you just... That's what you sing. That's what you do, So back to your first question, what's it like to have a big song like that? Well, I got to put that in perspective that the group we're in, Truth, only had 2 number 1 songs in 30 years, a 30-year career at that point of their group. So Christian radio didn't take Truth very seriously. And our first song right out of the box, we're still on so we record the first 4 hymn record in the beginning of January 1990 while we're on our Christmas break from Truth. We did it in 10 days.
Wow.
And we got back on the road because we had a Truth schedule. Truth was right back on the road like January 7th, January 8th. And so we're right back out. And Mark had just gotten married like December 27th or something like that.
Yeah.
Went on a little short honeymoon, right back in the studio.
So I don't mean to cut you off, but like 10 days, how do you even find the songs for that? I mean,
So like I said, we had started the process earlier in the fall.
Okay.
Going through songs, and our A&R guy, Andy Ivey, helping us pick the right songs, and we're picking the producers and that kind of stuff. So that was all the pre-production work. But when it came time to record, that's all the time we had, because that was our... we could do all other stuff on the road. They could come out and meet us and have meetings, but to actually have a couple of weeks where we could go home, see our families, and then get in the studio and then get back on the road, that's all we had. So we do the record and we go back on the road, and it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind until we get a phone call. We're setting up for a show somewhere with Truth, and we get a phone call that Where There's Faith's gone number 1. And we're just like, well, that didn't even register. Like, what do you mean? Barely heard it on the radio a couple of times. And so we find that out. And then there's a knock on the door. It's like, okay, back to work, everybody. We got a show to do. And we're right back into the Truth thing. So it was surreal, but then it was, again, out of sight, out of mind. We still had to finish our Truth commitment until August of that year. This was like April. And, but... once we were able to take a breath and realize what was happening, it was kind of mind blowing.
Yeah.
Because here our songs, we're hearing us on the John Rivers 20 The Countdown magazine, and I remember being in the car with my mom, and my wife and I were newly married, and we were in the car with my mom. She lived in Waco, and we were like, "Hey, our song's number 1 on the radio. It's being played everywhere." She's like, "Oh, that's nice, honey. Sure it is." And we're like, "No, listen." We turned on KLTY, which is out of Dallas. And as soon as we turned it on, there it was. There was my voice singing Where There's Faith, and my mom starts crying. We're like, "We told you. We're kind of a big deal now." It's crazy.
I don't know how to tell you this, Mom.
Yeah.
Kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Well, it's for me, my journey through Christian music begins with a White Heart concert in 1991.
Yeah.
In 90, I think it was, my older brother went and saw White Heart on their Freedom tour. And then I went the next year on their Powerhouse tour. And that kind of started me down the path.
Those are great tours, great shows.
Of the big rock bands. And then as I really dug in, my parents were into DeGarmo and Key. They were into, they had some Steve Taylor stuff floating around.
Yeah.
And then as we got a little older, we wanted to, we could sing in our family, and we wanted to sing songs together in church. And that's when my introduction to For Him comes into play, especially just the harmonies and the things we could do. My mom loved putting together the harmonies for us to sing and what you guys were doing. And once I went in and with the For Him stuff, then I was like, oh, I want to learn this. I want to sing it. And so here's my issue number one with you. Okay.
I think I know where you're going.
I was always the high tenor in our family.
I knew it.
What were you trying to do? First off, the stuff you're singing, I mean, you're like off the charts with a lot of that stuff. It's so high. And did you even, I mean, you were having to sing that stuff all the time. And I want to go, was there a studio Andy and a tour
No,
Andy?
not really.
I mean, how did you have to do that every night?
No, and I tell you what, there were so many times we finished, we would record a song and listen back and go, that's it. That's what the song should be. And then reality would sink in and go, oh, I've got to sing that every night now. Like, what am I doing to myself? No, I've always had an unusually high voice. It's just what God blessed me with. And, one of the things about truth is, and the For Him guys, we all talk about this a lot, that you felt like you were singing for your life every night because you could be replaced pretty easily. If you had, a couple of weeks of off night singing, or you just couldn't hack it, so there was always, you would hear somebody do something pretty crazy on stage and go, oh, okay, you just set the bar a little higher. So you'd push yourself. And man, you felt like a bodybuilder. By the time you spent a year in truth, you felt like a bodybuilder vocally. You could do anything. And it wasn't always the best idea to go higher and higher, louder and louder. But, there's hubris with youth. And you just go, oh, you say I can't? Oh, watch this.
Watch this.
Oh, you sang that? Well, watch me sing this. But it was, it was a muscle that you built. And that was the sound of Christian music, wasn't it? I mean, Smitty sang way up there. Stephen Curtis sang way up there. We sang way up there. All those guys.
Yeah. Well, here's the difference that I would say.
Way up.
And I love those guys too. I've heard you talk about this on your podcast, so I'm gonna go ahead and just tell you this because you're in my top 3 favorite vocalists of all time. Wow. And I was telling our guys this the other day. And I have some stories I can tell you behind it. And the reason is because I think just as a vocalist, you were able to sing with power that didn't sound like you were pushing it or overdoing it. You weren't yelling. You weren't doing, I mean, you hear a lot of that, especially in music these days where the vocalist is really just yelling, like not screaming, like yelling, they're trying to push beyond what they're really capable of doing. Yeah. And whether they're on pitch or not, that's not the point. It just sounds like you want to go, you're not going to ever be able to do that again. That's just a studio thing you just did. For you, it was never that. And then whenever I listened to you, I said something similar to Rick Florian when he was on here.
Amazing vocalist.
Wow. Where to me, when you would lead a song, whether it's in worship or even just on a For Him album or even a solo album, I mean, just an anointing on your voice that you just go, oh, that's it. Like, that's the sound.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a special gift that God gives.
It is a gift. I wish I could take credit for it. And listen, I worked hard. I've worked hard on my voice and my delivery and my performance. But in the end, you can't manufacture what's not there. And I work with a lot of artists and worship leaders across the country that are trying to take the next step as a vocalist or as a communicator. And I try to teach what I do, and I do have a system, but some of it's just intrinsic. You have the right, the muscles are laid out the right way in my voice. I have the right mindset. Like it makes sense to me when I do what I do, where to a lot of people that I train and work with, they don't think the same way I think about the voice and the delivery. So, with songwriters, there are certain songwriters just like, how do you turn a phrase like that? How do you come off that melody? It just comes out. So with me, the voice has been. I tell all the people that I consult with and coach that I guessed right early on. That's one of the things I can point to. Is I guessed right early on about how the voice works, and the people that I emulated from the 70s and 80s. That's what worked well for my voice, and I just say I guessed right, But the Lord was leading a lot of that, of course.
And for me, when I share that about you, there's really two songs that are kind of become my first realization of all that, which are on the Ride album,
Yeah.
Future Generations and Real Thing.
So Real Thing, I'm glad you brought that one up. Real Thing is one of my favorite memories in the studio because that was the first time we had worked with Michael Amardian. And if you don't know who Michael Amardian is, for your listeners, go look him up. Your mind's going to be blown at everything he's done. I mean, Billy Joel and Christopher Cross and Donna Summer and Steely Dan and you name it, Loggins and Messina. Well, the Imperials, those great Imperials records, Amy Grant, and there's nobody he hasn't worked with. And so to be able to work with him for the first time was just a huge honor. But what he was able to just working with him and what he got out of me for Real Thing is just one of my favorite experiences of all time. Like, I didn't know I could sing like that. And not that he had me do anything crazier than any other producer, but it's just being in the room with greatness and what he could just naturally pull out of you and the way he would set you up to succeed. And so that was, I remember after singing that and hearing it back in the control room, I was like, oh, wow, I'm really proud of that. Future Gen, that was one of those songs. I had Mark on my podcast, Mark Harris, who wrote that, and he wrote that for me, for my voice, and he and Don Cook did, and Dave Clark was a part of that as well. But that's when writers started actually writing for me and for what I could do vocally, and so that one just really fit like a glove, and they understood where my voice could go, and that was, those two songs. Now that song went on way too high for too long.
That one is up there. I'll tell you what. And I left my phone because I wanted to read lyrics to you, because I also bring up those two songs because lyrically they are, and I've talked about this several times on this podcast, they are to me what is somewhat missing from the Christian music market these days. Lyrically, the depth in those two songs is awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I've heard you do this, I don't know if you did it on YouTube or if you did whatever, where you just got out the acoustic guitar and sang Real Thing, I think.
Yeah.
And I wish more artists would do that. Go back into their back catalog and kind of bring them into this time period and sing them and let the lyrics stand on their own, because the words to Real Thing, I can dream about heaven constantly, day and night. I can set my mind on, and talking about heaven in the real world, like right here, like get focused on right here. Quit thinking about the out there, and I really want to encourage people to go and just, whether Spotify, Apple Music, go listen to For Him, Real Thing.
You bring up a great point, just lyrically, and I could go off the deep end about Christian music today, and I don't want to be the old guy. You guys don't learn you and your music. It's ours was so much better. It's not that. It's I feel like, and again, I've had a lot of artists come on my podcast say kind of the same thing I'm about to say, but there's a lack of poets in contemporary Christian music or in worship music. And it's not that it's an intrinsically bad thing, but there's just something. Well, I spent some time with Billy Smiley, and you talk about a great vocal, a vocal that just works. Dan Hasseltine from Jars of Clay, and he's got a new project that he's about to release called The River Criers, and so it's Billy Smiley and Dan Hasseltine and Ron Hemby, Steve Endelong. Just this really cool, and he let me hear a bunch of the mixes, and I was like, oh, the voices and the lyrical content, the poetry in these songs, and he was just like, I don't know where this is going to find a home. We just did it because it had to come out of us, but there's no poetry really in music. Now there are a few bands out there right now. Citizens comes to mind. Zach Bolan, I think, he's brilliant. I love what he does. And, you don't see anything about Brandon Lake or, some of these guys that, are going a little bit deeper now into lyrics and manufacturing some really creative music. But, that's missing now. And so to go back and read the lyrics I would challenge, your listeners to go read some of the For Him lyrics. And I can say that because I wasn't a main songwriter back then for any of our stuff. So read the For Him lyrics. Go back and read Cindy Morgan lyrics. Go back and read lyrics from Wes King.
Yeah.
And find songs written by Billy Simon and Wayne Kirkpatrick. Go back and
Rich Mullins.
Oh my goodness! Go back and listen. Just read the lyrics from Rich Mullins' tunes, and the guys that he was writing with and his crew.
You want to talk about another lyricist who was way out there in a fun way, and I've reached out to him, and hopefully one day I'll get him. Is Steve Taylor?
Oh yeah,
and the stuff and the things he wrote about, I was like, my goodness.
Yeah, melt down at Madame Tussauds and on the Fritz. Oh man, I grew up on those albums. Yeah. Mm-hmm. If you get him on your podcast, send him my way because I'm trying to get him on mine as well.
Well, he lives right down the street, so I'm trying.
Oh
to,
man, well let's go knock on his door. Let's go.
I don't know exactly where he lives. I'm just saying. Okay. So when we go on, I skipped over because I went to the ride with Future Generations, Real Thing,
which I think is our best record. I will say, I'll put that out there. So a lot of people will say. The Message, The Ride, I would put Walk On up there with our 3 best records.
Okay.
Just as far as content. But The Ride to me kind of stands out as I think our best work from top to bottom. And just the musicians and the producers that were on that and the level of songwriting that was happening. It's just really hard
I can give you my fans' perspective on it.
Okay, do it.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
Because I agree with you. When it comes to the ride, Future Generations, Real Thing, I even love Ride of Life.
Yeah.
It's just as a fun roller coaster ride.
I mean, how do you write a song about it? Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty brilliant way to get that lyric across.
And so I would say as far as, and I don't know all the number one hits or any of those things, but as far as like songs that you go, hey, like the big time, big hits, like I can go to the ride and go, okay, my favorite album, top to bottom, every song that I like is The Message.
I don't agree. I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, I mean, just everyone on there, and I also like it because every guy in the group has songs where they get to shine.
Yeah,
and all of them are good.
Yeah.
So you really don't have to skip anything. Yeah. Not that I would never skip, but you know what I mean. But yeah. So anyway, but let's go back.
Okay.
Because we didn't even talk about Basics of Life.
That's a big one.
And I know
that's a big one.
You've talked about that one, but that one's probably the one that really like rolls out the red carpet for the rest of the career.
It did. Yeah, it did. So, what you want as an artist is you want a career song, right? A career song keeps you around forever because people always come back. And one-hit wonders. That's what career songs are. You can have one hit and you'll be around forever. And so Where There's Faith was that for us. We had a second career song in Basics of Life. Now, the second record for us was Face the Nation, had Man You'd Write About, had He Never Changes, Over the Horizons, and those are big songs for us. But it wasn't until Basics of Life that we had our second career song. Now, if you can have 2 career songs, now you've got a career that's gonna be a little more hefty, right?
Some longevity and
and if you want to throw in Future Gen, that was our third career song as well. So that really cemented us kind of just in the legacy of, and again, I'm just saying, I was just a part of that. I didn't write the songs. I didn't produce them. I only sang on parts of them. So I'm not taking any credit by saying that cemented us kind of in the landscape of Christian music for that era. But Basics of Life, it's funny. I've talked to several different artists who said, yeah, one of my songs was the first song to be on 100% rotation on every station in America on every format. And I'll be like, actually, it was told to us that that we made history with the Basics of Life being the first song on heavy rotation, 100% on every AC, inspo, and CHR station in the country. And it was a transformative song for us, and I think for a lot of careers too. For Don Cook, who co-wrote it and produced it, obviously for Mark as a songwriter, that was the first one that was like this grand slam over the fence that kind of set him up as a songwriter for decades to come that everyone wanted to work with. For Benson as a company at the time, it was a bell cow album and song for them. And it, all of a sudden, we're playing for, 1,500 to 2,000 people a night. And now we're playing for 10,000 people a night just because of one song. And
do you know that when you're recording that? I mean, like, you name these 3 songs: Where There's Faith, Basics of Life, Future Generations. I mean, I know you probably get asked that.
So you kind of know, the songwriters, they kind of know, when they strike gold, they're like, oh, we got something here. You start doing, you hear the demo and you go, wow, I feel like this is going to be a big song. Let's try not to mess it up. And then you get in the studio and you hear the mixes and you go, man, I might be crazy, but this is going to be huge. And I remember, you kind of know, like, and you get the right voice on it, you get Kirk's voice on that, and you go, I think this is going to be big, because you can just feel it, right? And, the only gut feeling you have as an artist is, if I think it's awesome, I think other people are going to think it's awesome. It's just like going to a movie, right? You go to a movie and you go, oh, that was awesome. I got to tell everybody about it, right? It's just, you feel that way about songs. You're a great restaurant, you go to a great restaurant and the food's amazing. You go, this place is going to do well, right?
Yeah.
You kind of feel that about a song or an album. And I remember we premiered that song right after we recorded it in our hometown of Mobile at a concert we did there. And we set it up by saying, hey, we got a new record coming out in a few months, but we just finished this song, and it's the title track of the album. We're going to play it. We're going to do it for you. And the place went bonkers. I mean, and we kind of looked at each other like, uh-oh, we got a big hit on our hands here. And it did, man. It's still, I mean, it's when you say For Him to people, that's the first thing they're going to say is Basics of Life.
And isn't that the dream, though? Like, when you're in a group like that, or whether you wrote it or not, just to be a part of something like that and kind of bottle that.
But I will say, Josh, that, that it's short-lived, because you're back to work. You don't just sit back and go, oh, we got some big song. Let's enjoy this for a little while. I mean, you got concerts. You got 120 dates a year you're doing. You're doing promo. You don't dwell, because, by the time that song comes out and that record comes out, you're working on the next project, or you're putting the next tour together, or, everything's moving at such a pace that you don't really get to sit and enjoy it. It's not until years later you can have these kind of conversations and go, wow, that really meant a lot to a lot of people.
Yeah. And it's, to me, it's fun to have these conversations. I will say one thing that I have found interesting, and I've heard you talk about this, so I wanted to talk about it with you.
Okay.
I felt like there was this weird time period as Christian music has changed that it's almost like artists from the 90s, 2000s didn't want to talk about it. Didn't want to talk about their music, or almost were embarrassed by it. I don't know if that's the right word. And it never made sense to me. In fact, I would hear some people even kind of poke fun at the Christian music industry, and that really hacks me off, because it bothers me. Like, I go back and listen to any, like, even mainstream secular music, okay? And people will say, well, Christian music of this generation, it had a cheesy production or cheesy sound or whatever it may be. I was like, go back and listen to all music. Production changes through the years. Go back and listen to 80s. Go back and listen to 90s.
Yeah.
And Christian music would get a bad rap. And I'm like, no. Okay, all music, does that. And I'm just asking you that question because I love that time. I never had that period.
I would love to dive into this. I really would.
Okay.
And I've experienced exactly what you're talking about, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. But I think where a lot of that came from was that for as much gold as there was in Christian music, and I'm going to reflect this in what For Him did as well, is that there was also a bit of cheese. There we were trying to do what we saw the secular world doing, but on a fraction of the budget and on a fraction of the cool factor. Only people that were really cool were DC Talk, maybe the Newsboys, Audio A. Amy Grant had her own thing. Michael W. had his own thing. But the rest of us, we're not buying, $10,000 outfits. And, there wasn't the budget for that. There wasn't the market for us to be what was happening to the artists in the secular world, flying private jets. And, they have all these trainers and people that are handlers that are making them look great everywhere. In the videos we're doing, working with people like Stephen Yake, producing really great music videos, it still wasn't on the level of what we were seeing on MTV. Mm-hmm. So it did feel like a poor copy of what was going on in the secular world. So when you look back at it, especially, and let's be honest, what happened in the 90s was grunge took over.
Yeah,
it happened in the secular world too, right? To where there was a backlash against the big vocalists and the thin sound of music. Now that was huge guitars and huge rock bands again, and there was kind of an anti-establishment thing going on. Mm-hmm. So it happened the same way in Christian music, that I think it ran its course maybe for too long, and Christian music was always slow to change. Mm-hmm. The kind of the knock on Christian music back then was, well, they're like 2 years behind what's happening in pop music or rock music, and they're just copying what they hear.
Well, and you know what Christian record labels used to do, which it probably made sense to them because they wanted to sell product.
I know where you're going with this.
Is they would, in the bookstores, build like signs up that said, okay, here's this Christian band, this is who they sound like.
Right.
And basically going, they're not original, they're not creative.
So
they're
instead
just
of listening
trying
to Beastie
copy.
Boys, listen to DC Talk.
Yes.
Instead of listening to Wilson Phillips, listen to Born of Grace.
Get this for your kid.
Yeah.
And,
exactly.
And instead of letting it stand on its own.
Right.
Yeah.
Instead of listening to Michael Bolton, listen to Clay Cross. Mm-hmm. Right. And so that did. I think what it did was, in an attempt to sell this product to the Christian listener, they devalued it. Mm-hmm. And it over time that erodes what that is. And so I think, here's my perspective on it. Okay. So I get out of, For Him runs its course. I feel like God's calling me into worship, and worship is starting to take over in the early 2000s. It's starting to shift. You've got Martin Smith and Delirious coming over. You've got Sonic Flood starting to happen.
Flood album. Yeah.
Yeah. You have this new wave coming in, and it's just changing the face of what Christian music is. And so I feel God's calling me, your time in For Him's over. I want you to go back to the church and do what I originally called you to do, which is lead worship and lead my people in songs of praise. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to do that. I'm going to take my skill set that I've learned in For Him over the last couple of decades in truth, take that into the church, which a lot of us started doing. And the younger generation, they didn't look favorably because they felt like that was their parents' music. Or what I would hear was, my parents used to drag us to your concerts, or our parents made us listen to you. But then we found, U2, or we found, Third Eye Blind, or we found, Beastie Boys. We found these other things that were cooler than what our parents were trying to make us listen to. And so I just think there was a natural progression of it ran its course.
Yeah.
And we always look back on, there's the generation ahead of us always looks back on what we loved as corny. And, and they don't take into account, well, that was the style at the time. That was what was popular at the time. And so we were all in the middle of it. But you look back and go, oh, you guys were lame. Look at those videos. You're lame. Your hair was lame. Your outfits were lame. And we're looking back going, we could have made better decisions.
We were doing the best that we could, at the time.
I hated making music videos. I always felt weird, acting in front of the camera. It just wasn't natural for me. And it comes off that way when I look back at those videos. And so there were, me included, and I've had this conversation with a lot of people, we went, then I guess we just won't talk about it. Because if there's ridicule there, and it was harsh from a lot of people, a lot of that younger generation, it was harsh. And so you just kind of go, yeah, I don't need that. And what are we trying to do? We're trying to build this next thing in our lives. And I, for one, put all of my number one plaques and all my trophies in my closet. I didn't put them up on my walls in my office. I was just like, well, that was a different era. Let's move on to this next era. And I think I think it was a shame to do that. A shame. That's a bad way to say it. I think it was okay at the time. Mm-hmm. I think it was okay to say that door closed, and let's don't look at the past. Let's move on. And then you get down the road a little bit and go, wait a second. That was actually some really good music. Mm-hmm. We actually affected a lot of people's lives. God used us to do some pretty amazing things back in those days. And I will tell you this, I started putting my stuff back up in my office. So when the younger generation that I'm leading now came in, and they would look at me and go, you don't know what you're talking about. I would go, yeah, look around. Mm-hmm. So I've got a great story about this.
Okay.
I know I'm taking over your conversation.
No, you got it. You got it.
I do my own podcast. And, try not, I was in the studio with Michael Amardian one time. This is in the late 90s. And Omar, like I'd said earlier, worked with everybody. And he's got, somebody told me that he's responsible. He's got his name on 900 million sales or something like that. Like, it's crazy the success he's had in the history of music. So he and I are getting in a little argument one time. And I like my idea. He likes his idea where the song should go. And we're going back and forth, back and forth. And finally he goes, hey, Chrisman, why don't you go over there, get your cup of coffee. Walk down that hallway, get your cup of coffee. When you come back, tell me what you saw along the way. And I knew exactly what he was saying, because down that hallway, both sides of the hallway were lined from floor to ceiling with platinum records with his name on it. And I went, okay, I get it. You've done this a lot longer than I, a lot more success than I have. I'll listen to you. And his idea was great. And I remembered that. And I was like, hey, you know what? I got nothing to be ashamed of. Look at I've been a part of 25 number one songs, 10 million records sold, awards all over the place. People, millions and millions of people have loved what I've been a part of. I'm not going to hide that anymore. So when you come in and say, you don't know what you're talking about, oh yeah, that was in the past, I'm like, well, yeah, the past matters, doesn't it? And I do know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And so I've seen artists, and I kind of help some artists to go, hey, pull those things out of the closet. Pull those things up, put them on the walls again. You were part of something that was amazing. And you know what? You should, not that we pat ourselves on the back, but we go, wow, God, look what you did. Look what you did through me. Maybe you'll do that again.
Well, I tell all of you guys who come in here, here I've been in pastoral ministry for over 20 years, and I tell all you guys, you all had a major part in that. When, before we went out live on this, I would tell you I would go to Seeds Conference that Church on the Move would do, and you were the worship pastor. And when I first found out that you had transitioned from what you were doing with For Him, and then you went straight into worship, and what in my mind, I love it. That's such a natural thing. And when then Seeds came along and what you were doing there, I wanted to go there, but it wasn't because I was like, oh great, let's get rid of the past.
Yeah.
Like I told you when we started this, I never had that period where I looked down on that, and I was always excited to see what the next step was for each of the guys. I would love it. It bothers me that more of the groups from that time aren't doing more shows together and reunion things together.
It's really hard,
and
yeah, it's really hard. Like we said earlier, there's no recurrent for Christian music. I think we said that earlier, that there's classic rock stations, classic country stations, classic jazz stations. There's no classic Christian music station. And I don't know why, unless it's just, again, people don't put the value on it that they probably should. And there's such good stuff out there. Go back and listen to a Susan Ashton record.
Right.
I dare you not to put that on and just go, oh, this is wonderful. Because who's it produced by? Wayne Kirkpatrick, who ended up writing and producing for Garth Brooks and Little Big Town, and now is writing and producing shows on Broadway. Yeah, that's who produced and wrote for Susan Ashton. Go back and put on a For Him record and listen to Michael Amardian and Peter Wolf and Don Cook produce that stuff. Or Brent Bourgeois, who's one of the great producers of all time. Go put on a Rich Mullins record and listen to how wonderful the production is and the way the songs flow.
Go listen to Freedom from Whiteheart.
Yeah, okay. Right. Brown Bannister. One of the great producers.
Gordon Kennedy, Tommy Sims, musicians on that record. Chris McHugh.
And I think because, again, when something... It's the stuff that didn't sound as good and were a little cheesy that kind of made their way, through all of that it all, the negative gets what is focused on instead of what was so good about all those records back in the day. And, did you go to the Seeds conference when we did the history of worship or the history of Christian music?
I did. I was at both. There was one that was the history of Christian music, and there was one that was a history of worship.
Yeah.
So I was both of those years. Yes.
So it's interesting, because again, that younger generation that I worked with, all those people that I worked with at Church on the Move, and I still love them dearly, and they're very dear friends of mine. They're the ones who would kind of mock that era of Christian music and just how cheesy it was. And I'm like, yeah, but you didn't. It was all cheesy. Yeah, no, we don't want anything to do with that. But when we started, somebody had the idea, and I don't remember who it was, for the Seeds conference to do the history of worship. And we went back and started playing all these old songs that we grew up with in the 80s and 90s that everybody remembered.
Yeah, it was great.
We bring a sacrifice of praise. And everybody could sing every word. And, blessing and honor, glory and power. We knew everything. We knew all the,
the Jewish drum beats.
Oh, yeah. And so when we put this little it wasn't a skit, but it kind of was, where we took you through all the big songs that we all grew up listening to. And Furtick was on the front row, Craig Rochelle was on the front row, and they're losing their minds.
It was great.
They're freaking out. But it shows you, wait a minute, that wasn't all bad. It to our standards today, it sounds cheesy, but when you sing them and you spend some time with them, you go, wow, these are transformative songs in our lives. And then when we're like, oh, how do we follow that up? History of Christian music. We start doing Awesome God. And I thought the bit, and I came up with it. I think I came up with it. I don't know. I'll take credit for it. We did El Shaddai. El Shaddai.
Oh, yes.
El Shaddai. Because we're like, nobody knew what Amy was saying there.
Okay,
right?
you need to take credit for that, because that was the standout moment.
Yeah, and everybody lost their minds. Because why is it? It's shared history. We all go back and go, I remember that. Oh, yeah, we had fun singing those songs back in the day.
Right.
And we did Basics of Life in there, and it was, I think what that did was, once you just give some time to it and you go, you know what, those were great memories. Those are really good times, and those were some really great songs that we are part of. And you start to kind of light that flame again and go, oh yeah, let's just spend some time here now.
This just occurred to me right here in this moment, and I'm going to say it. Think about this. Because remember, you mentioned the 90s and when grunge took over and whatever. Okay, well, what music then immediately went away and everyone made fun of was the hair band.
Yep.
80s rock.
Right.
Which now, those are the bands playing stadiums.
That's right. That's exactly right.
They got back together and are now touring and doing big. It like kind of circled back the thing that was being made fun
because
of.
as we get older, we're less cool than we thought we were. Right? You get a little bit older and you go, oh, yeah, I do kind of like that.
Yeah,
I do kind of like me some. Some Poison,
Motley
Crue, and all that stuff. You're kind of like, it does make me smile, and I do know all the words. So yeah, I'll go to that concert and I'll listen to that stuff again. It all does come back around, and that that's one of the things I've realized too, especially doing this kind of I can think it's a docuseries really what I'm doing this podcast. In reviving people's memories of that era of Christian music is it's coming back around.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and everybody misses it.
Yeah.
It's like, why can't we have that kind of music again? Well,
Yeah.
It's just maybe if we talk about it enough and we remind people to go back and listen to it again, it'll become a taste that they want, right? They'll be like, I want that again. And so somebody will come back and go, okay, I'll give that to you.
Yeah.
I can do that.
It's cool.
Hopefully that will happen.
Yeah, and even I'll say this one more thing, and then we got to wrap this up. But I want to talk about Church on the Move just for a minute. Even Michael W. Smith recently, in some of his tours now, has done full sets of going back and doing his old tunes.
Yeah,
and he still has the worship set that he does there at the end of the show. But I was so happy to see, like, he put out these things and, hey, put in your requests and we'll just throw as many of them in as we can on the show. And I was like, see, that's what I want to hear.
Josh, everything's cyclical, right? And you've seen this. If you're in ministry long enough, you see everything come back around, right? It's, I've seen this as a worship pastor. I've seen, the beginning of the worship movement, and it's just people singing songs, and it's flags, and it's dancers, and it's the short chorus over and over again to then it's big production and big lights, and and now what's it coming back around to? Well, it's kind of kumbaya again,
right?
Scaling back. This next generation, they don't want all the flash and bang and sizzle and everything. It's coming back to a little more of the let's kind of bring it back down, just some acoustic guitars, kick your shoes off, and then but what's going to happen again? It's going to come back around. Excellence is going to come back around. So you do this long enough, you go, it's all going to come back around. And the same thing with, we've seen the 80s come back around in pop music. We've seen the 90s now make their rounds in pop music. It'll all come back around again. Just hang on.
Yeah.
Just wait long enough, and it will come back around. And I do. I think people. I think God uses people like us to, He puts it in people's spirit, like, hey, bring that back. But what does it do? He brings it back with the information. Like, you don't forget everything that you were just in. You come back informed, and you go, wait, what we did in the 80s, what we did in the 90s, and the early 2000s, and the 2010s, we can take all that together and now make a unique sound for the 2020s, right? And it's influenced by all these different things. And maybe it leans a little more this way and that way. I'm off the rails here.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one funny thing, too. Hopefully you'll laugh at this, because I laugh at it. And I remember I told you you're in my top 3 vocalists, okay? So keep that in mind when I tell you this. Way back, I auditioned to be a lead singer of a band. And this was during the time when vocalists needed to sound like Scott Stapp from Creed, or Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam, or whatever. Yeah, exactly right. So I sing, this audition and whatever, and the guy goes, "Well, man, really like your voice. If I were looking for like the For Him guy, I would hire you, but
I'm not looking for the For Him.
He goes, but I'm looking for like a gravelly voice.
Funny.
But here's what I heard. I sound like Andy Chris. Are you for real? Like, seriously? Okay, I don't want to be in this band then. To me, it was the biggest compliment. I was like, oh man, well, hey, I'll take that. And which brings me to this at the Seeds Conference in Church on the Move. All right. Many people have asked me about this song, No Longer Slaves, that Bethel Music came out with years and years ago. First time I ever heard it, I heard you lead it at a Seeds conference.
Yeah.
And that ruined me for hearing it any other way. And rarely do I get the opportunity to lead worship and be a part of what we're doing here, because we have a great team and I preach. But I do it the way I heard you do it that very first time, all the time, which to me was probably, it's just up there with one of the top worship experience moments that I've ever had.
Yeah.
And I say that, I mean, God did that. God obviously was working through you on that evening when that happened. I even remember, now I can't remember the guy's, the drama guy, Chris
Munch.
Chris Munch wrote a little sketch talking about his daughter, about her not being enough.
Right.
And then it went into No Longer Slaves.
Oh, wow. I forgot about that.
And that whole thing, really, even to this, I don't do it like maybe once a year, where I will just want to sing No Longer Slaves, just to kind of remember that moment and that experience and worship that I had there. So thank you for that.
Oh, wow.
And it was wonderful.
Wow. I said this earlier about, Mark and those guys starting to write songs for me, so that fit my voice and fit my style of communication. And I've realized as I've, in these decades of being a worship pastor and a worship leader and really giving all of my energy to worship music, there are a few songs that I feel like the Holy Spirit has gone, I wrote this for you. Like, not just for me, but like, this is your song. And No Longer Slaves was that. And I remember singing it for the first time and going, wow, this really fits my voice. It fits my personality as a singer. And it just makes, like, the lyrics make sense to me in the way I phrase things naturally. And not every song does that, and especially a lot of worship songs don't do that for me. And so that song has been, it's interesting you brought that up, because that song hadn't even really been released yet when we did it.
First time I heard it.
The way we found it was one of our worship leaders found out that Bethel was doing a live. They were singing all the songs live in California on like outside somewhere, one time only, and we're like singing all the songs from this new record that was coming out that was going to be on. And so she did a screen recording of it. And when she heard No Longer Slaves, she started yelling for all of us to come listen to it. And we were like, and I remember Whit going, we're doing that for Siege. And it was like in a week. And we're like, okay, we're gonna have to grab all of the changes and all the instrumentation off this screen recording and come up with our own version of it. And I even sang the lyrics differently. Like, I didn't sing the lyrics because we didn't have any printed lyrics or anything like that. And I just remember that night, the glory of God fell that night.
Oh, it was powerful.
And
we
was
talked
very,
about it.
very powerful. Yeah.
And I'm glad you said that about the lyrics, because I still actually sing the wrong lyrics the way you do it, because I think they work better.
So when I say the song feels like it was written for me, I change the lyrics. I do that a lot. In my worship team, they kind of roll their eyes at me. And I'm like, you're going to have to get over it, because this is my song now. And I say that not to say that I own it, but I'm like, this is mine. And if it feels better for me to sing it a little more this way, I'm not going to change the lyric or change the theology of the song. I'm not going to dishonor the songwriter in that way. And if you're part of a worship team, don't do that. Just don't sing the song. If you're going to whole scale change the lyrics, do a different song. But they're just the way the words float out.
There's a certain cadence.
There's a cadence that made more sense to me.
Right.
Yeah.
I like how Mark Gershmel said it when he was in here. He said there's certain singers that put words in the taste of the mouth better and need to come out that way, as opposed to, and I think that's what we're talking about. Yeah. That there was just a way that certain words needed to come out of your singing voice that fit that.
And I will tell you this, I would be very, back in our 4 hymn days, I had a lot of respect for the songwriter. And so there'd be times I'd be in the studio cutting a lead vocal, and I would just like, I don't like saying it this way, or I don't like the melody going here. And I would try to change it, but then I would call the songwriter and just go, hey, before we lay this down, are you okay if, in 100% of the time, as long as we weren't changing what the song said, or just, we weren't damaging the song in the eyes of the songwriter, 100% of the time the songwriter said, yeah, it's your song now. And that's what they would all say. I wrote it, but it's yours now. When you lay your vocal on it, it's yours. So make it what you need it to be. And so I've done that with a lot of worship songs. And you're right. It's funny. I still sing that song because people want me to sing it wherever I go. And I go to different churches and I have to go, oh, wait. I have to think of what the real lyric is here, because they're not going to change it. There have been several places like, hey, we changed the lyrics like you used to do at Church on the Move. I'm like, oh, thank God, because that's what's in my DNA now with that. But I have to really look hard at the lyrics on the screen and go, Sing it the way it's written.
That's
because
awesome.
That's what everybody in the congregation is going to be singing.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, last thing I'll just say to you, here we are. We're sitting in this podcast studio. I told this to you yesterday when we were walking around in this hallway here at Create Hope Studios, and that Seeds Conference and your part in it, and Whit George and some of the things that he shared in that, Willie George, across the board, things Church on the Move, the real beginnings and things of what Create Hope Studios is here now,
wow.
which is a fully functioning where we teach young people dance, art, learning instruments, production. We actually began doing something when we opened this all up in 2017, where we train our high school kids, those who want to do production, video, cameras, whatever. My son Jordan, who's graduating high school, is producing this one. And even on our Sunday morning services and live stream, we will put high school kids in there because we want to train up the next generation. And all of that got its roots in those Seeds conferences.
Wow.
And so
I'm floored.
It's so cool. Like those are the things you just don't know. And even going back to For Him and going back, I told this to the White Heart guys. I'm in ministry. I mean, I know God called me to ministry. I know I know His hand has been upon it. But He used you guys and your music and the things you're doing. And you didn't know that when you were recording those songs. Mm-mm. You didn't know that God would, like, the fingers of God were going to be going out in ways. And it's like, those are the things that's why I put those things up on the wall. That's why I get that stuff out of the closet. That's why I love your podcast, and you're talking to those people and share with them and say, man, you have no idea the real impact. You were just living your life and doing the best you could. Yeah. But the impact goes so far out of people you will never meet who are impacting the kingdom of God, that God's using through what you guys have done.
You can't predict what God's going to do, right? You can't. And God loves to surprise us. I think there's what's the scripture that says that the glory of the king is to hide his response, or there's something in Proverbs. It's like the glory of the king is to conceal a matter. Okay. And so it probably is not meant to where I'm going to take it here, but I think there's something about God where He finds joy in hiding things from us, because it's such a great surprise later on when you see His hand, what it was doing. And another thing it does is teach us, just do the next thing. Just do the next thing. Don't worry about the outcome. When we really trust God, we don't need to worry about the outcome. Just do the next thing, and don't think about, well, how does this benefit me? Well, how does this affect my name? Just do the next thing. And I will tell you, so many of the conversations that I have with artists, that's their story. They didn't know what they were doing. They were just like, well, here's an open door. I just said yes. I just did the next thing. And I look back 40 years later and go, wow, look what God did. Yeah, it's awesome. You just play your part. Yeah. Play your part and let God do what He wants to do. And that's what He's so good at. Yeah. He's so good at, let's go back to the Proverbs. We can plan it in our hearts, but what's God going to do? Right. He's going to order our steps. That's it. We don't get to order our steps. So take that off the table, right? And that's brought peace to me, and then especially in this season of my life where I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing next year. So hey, what are you doing this summer? I don't know. I don't know, but I know I've got some plans in my heart. I know what I'm passionate about. I know what I'm working on. God will order the steps. I don't have to order those. I don't have to figure it all out. And again, if you're in ministry, if you're an artist, or if you're just kind of in a waiting zone, you're kind of, I don't know what to do next. Just do the next right thing. Right. Just do the next natural thing. And God goes, I'm doing all this for you anyway. So just relax and have fun. That's awesome. Let's end on that one. I really appreciate having you on here. That's a good word for anybody who's listening right now. Probably someone needed to hear that, right? Good. And so Andy Chrisman, thank you so much. Really appreciate you. Everybody check out Andy's podcast. New episodes every week. Every week. One Degree of Andy with awesome guests that you're going to want to hear their stories. And so thank you so much. Same for us. Check us out every week with new episodes and everything. And so, man, God's blessings on you. And I look forward to seeing what's going to be happening next year. Thank you, Josh. All right. Thank you.